I'm going to call the April 20, 2022 Williamsburg Planning Commission meeting to order. Heather, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Hamilton?
Here.
Mr. Kale? Mr. Tarley?
Here.
Mr. Boswell?
Here.
Mr. Granger?
Here.
Mr. Sokolowski? Ms. Liebel?
Here.
Thank you. Our first order of business is approval of the minutes of our regular meeting, March 16, and the work session on March 23rd. I know there were a couple of updates made since the time those were posted last Friday online. Does anybody have any additional updates or edits to those minutes? Okay, could we have a motion to approve both of those sets of minutes?
I'll second.
Mr. Hamilton? Mr. Tarley?
Aye.
Mr. Boswell?
Aye.
Mr. Granger?
Aye.
Ms. Liebel?
Aye.
All right, thank you. The minutes are approved. Our next item of business is an open forum. This is an opportunity for anyone to come up and speak to us about anything other than what's on the agenda. The agenda items will have a separate opportunity to do that later on in the meeting. And I'm not seeing that, so I'll close that open forum. We have two consent agenda items on our agenda today, the fire station and the Aldi expansion. Per our bylaws, if it's on the consent agenda, we're not going to have a presentation or a discussion, but any commissioner can ask to have either of those items removed from the consent agenda so that we can discuss it. Is there any interest in removing either of those from the consent agenda? I'll wait for Mr. Sokolowski, just in case. Sure. So we're at the consent agenda. Did you have any interest in pulling either of those items off the consent agenda? Okay. Can we have a motion to approve the consent agenda items as submitted?
So moved. Second.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Tarley?
Aye.
Mr. Boswell?
Aye.
Mr. Granger?
Aye.
Mr. Sokolowski?
Aye.
Ms. Liebel?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to the public hearings. We have PCR 22-005 and PCR 22-006, which are both requests of Strange Ways Brewing. Are we going to do those together?
Yes.
Okay, super. Aaron?
Good afternoon. This is a request, we have a new slide. There we go. This is a request on behalf of Strange Ways Brewing to amend the zoning ordinance to allow, to add microbrewery, microdistillery, micro-winery, and/or micro-cidery with a capacity of not exceeding 15,000 barrels per year with a special use permit to the Economic Development ED2 district. The applicant is also requesting a special use permit to operate a microbrewery at 1430 Unit 1103 High Street. The economic development land use category is intended to encourage economic development activities that provide desirable employment and enlarge the city's tax base. Large mixed-use developments can contribute to the city's character and economic well-being by having a well-designed mix of uses rather than being a monolithic commercial, office, healthcare, or residential development. This land use category expands the historic mixed-use concept beyond the city's core area to two large areas for future development: the High Street Williamsburg development on Richmond Road and the Quarter Path at Williamsburg Riverside development on the east side of Quarter Path Road. Development areas as designated as economic development land use should address a range of important goals stated by the city's comprehensive plan, including protecting and enhancing Williamsburg's unique character, encouraging conservation of open space, encourage high-quality commercial and institutional developments, encourage adequate housing opportunities, encourage appropriate scale and character for new residential development, improve and expand bicycle and pedestrian facilities, and preserve scenic vistas, natural areas, and historic sites on public and private land. The ED and ED2 districts implement this category. To ensure that the majority of economic development land is developed for tax-generating, commercial, entertainment, office, and medical use areas used exclusively for residential areas used exclusively for residential should be limited to a minority of the land in each of the economic development areas on a designated plan. Residential density up to 10 dwelling units per acre for the ED district and up to 12 units per acre for the ED2 district. This map here shows the ED2 district in High Street. Lands to the north, south, and east are fronting Richmond Road are designated as corridor commercial. Properties to the south not fronting Richmond Road are designated as urban residential and sensitive environmental, and properties to the north not fronting Richmond Road are designated public, semi-public, and William and Mary. Properties to the west are designated corridor commercial, high-density multifamily residential, and medium-density single-family residential. The Economic Development District, ED2, is established to enhance the city's real property tax base, to allow a mixture of tax-generating commercial, entertainment, and office uses in a mixed-use setting with an emphasis on landscape and high-quality design standards. On a property which is designated by the Comprehensive Plan Economic Development Land Use. This district is also intended to encourage economic development activities that provide desirable employment and enlarge the tax base. Residential uses are allowed as a major component of the development and should be integrated into the overall design. Higher intensity uses, such as manufacture or assembly, warehouses, or distribution centers, may be allowed with the issuance of a special use permit. In this case, the applicant is proposing to occupy an existing structure formerly occupied by the Pendleton store at the intersection of High Street and Richmond Road. The Architectural Review Board reviewed the proposed patio furnishings for this use at their April 12, 2022 meeting. The board discussed lighting of the patio space, and the board approved the proposed patio furnishings with the recommendation of umbrellas that would be in tan in color. The Site Plan Review Committee met on March 16, 2022, and were in support of this proposal. The use of a microbrewery, microdistillery, microwinery, or microcidery in the Economic Development ED2 district is compatible with the stated intent of the district by enhancing the city's real property tax base to allow a mixture of tax-generating commercial, entertainment, office uses in a mixed-use setting. The use of the location at 1403 in Suite 1103 High Street as a microbrewery is supported by other dining and entertainment establishments in the High Street development area. The applicant is proposing to have an outdoor dining area in addition to the indoor space. Staff recommends the Planning Commission recommend approval of PCR 22-005, a request of Strangeways Brewing for a text change amendment to allow microbrewery, microdistillery, microwinery, and/or microcidery with a capacity of not more than 15,000 barrels per year, with a special use permit in the Economic Development ED2, and to recommend approval of PCR 22-006, a request of Strangeways Brewing for a special use permit to operate a restaurant and microbrewery at 1430 Unit 1103 High Street. Staff is available if you have any questions, and the applicant is also present.
Questions for Aaron?
I have a question. So there'll be a working kitchen in this facility as well?
I'm not sure if there'll actually be a kitchen space, but
It says restaurant.
We'll have the applicants come up, because I had a couple questions related to that too.
Okay.
So if Aaron doesn't know that one.
I don't.
Anything else for Aaron?
Significance to the 15,000 barrels per year capacity?
My understanding is that is generally an industry standard. When you cross over that line, you become a larger distributor.
Okay, we'll go ahead and open the public hearing. The applicant I know is here I can read T-shirts from a distance, so I know we have the applicants here. Would you like to step forward, and one of you if you have a statement for us, that's great. If not, we do have a couple of questions from
Hi guys, I'm Neil Burton, the owner of Strangeways Brewing. We don't have a whole lot to add to kind of answer to the kitchen question though. We kind of do pretzels that are already pre-made, that are frozen, that go into like a toaster oven. We'll have a nacho cheese and chili cheese dispenser for nachos, kind of quick serve type food items that are allowable for breweries that are not brew pubs. So we work with the Virginia Department of Agriculture, and then we also don't cross as much into the Virginia Department of Health because of our standing. So we stay under the agricultural allowances of how we serve food, what food we serve, and things of that nature.
That was related to what my,
So it's not and then in relation to the 15,000 barrel, that is kind of an industry standard. We're not a large production facility in this type of a space. Think more of like a tasting room that does make some beer. And we do things in a barrel, so wooden barrels and or foeders. Foeders are larger vats that are wooden that house the beer, and we can ferment from that point on. We can add adjunct ingredients or other types of ingredients. We can blend beers. So these are different forms of ways we manufacture. It's nothing like our manufacturing process that we have in Dabney Road in Richmond, or in Fredericksburg. We have another full production facility where it's kind of A to Z, big equipment, requires a lot of other things that we don't really need here in this particular space. We think we're a natural fit for Williamsburg. We think the ED2 zoning looked like it was a good place for our type of a use. We actually were approached by the folks from the landlord who seeked us out because they thought we would be a good fit for the area, and been talking with them for almost a year and a half now to kind of get to this point. So it's been a fairly long journey, but a good one. And so my first job out of college was in Williamsburg, so I've got some history here and really enjoyed working here. So that's kind of what we have. If there's any other questions, we'd be happy to.
Let me just ask a follow-up question to Mr. Tarley on the same. Since we're talking about food, I saw at some of your other locations, Richmond, Fredericksburg, I think you have food trucks coming. Are you planning that here as part of this operation? And have you looked at that ordinance to make sure that's all compatible?
So we're near so many restaurants already. We have Subway. We have a Mexican restaurant right across from us. There's a Thai restaurant. There's a higher-end French restaurant. There's a burger, Five Guys Burgers. There's a cafe that serves kind of like wine and cafe food. And so we feel like we have enough restaurants nearby to kind of support our consumers. There's also an empty space, a couple of empty spaces that wouldn't mind if a food vendor went into those as well to kind of help additionally. We do look at, like sometimes restaurants get busy, and during crunch periods, it might be a Saturday, at 5 o'clock, they're very busy, and so they might not be able to support our consumer as easily. Or maybe we have somebody who wants to basically, like say they want to sell like lobsters, and no one does lobsters in the area, and do like a lobster boil type of thing out of a food truck. So that would be the kind of thing that we wouldn't mind utilizing. We have approved that through the landlord, but we haven't looked into the city regulations because it wasn't a huge part of our business plan, having the need for food trucks with so many restaurants nearby. So,
Other questions?
So I'll make sure that I understand, with the restaurants that are nearby, you're gonna have some outdoor seating and such. I assume then that you won't have signs that say no outside food. You'll invite people to bring food from the other restaurants and stuff. And
correct.
enjoy
People
your
could
area.
even bring food from their homes. I mean, if you wanted to pack a sandwich and bring it to a brewery, most breweries allow that type of a thing as well.
Okay.
So it's kind of fairly open. And yeah, we do allow seating. So if somebody went to Subway, purchased a sandwich, came over and, ordered a beer or any sort of drink we have a large selection of alcoholic and non-alcoholic beverages, and they wanted to sit there and have a beverage, that would certainly be fine with us.
Just figured I'd make sure. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Other questions? Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
We still are in an open public forum. Anybody else that would like to come and address the commission on these two applications, either or both, is welcome to do so at this time. And no mad rush, so I will close the public forum and give us the opportunity to discuss.
I mean, it seems like an obvious fit. Since we allow restaurants in that same kind of area, it seemed like this is an obvious next step, so makes perfect sense to me.
I feel good about it. I'm pretty excited. I think it'll bring some new energy and vibrancy to a corner that needs it, and I think it'll probably be well received by the people in the area, as well as tourists. I mean, it's nice to have a business that will be somewhat unique to the area, I don't know how many other locations there are like this, but a couple, but, so people come to town, it'll stand out, it'll be different, it'll be, nice and unique, and Williamsburg should be nice and unique.
Yeah, I think that that particular area is entertainment, restaurant, dining, and, brewery, craft brewer, being in that area seems like a good fit. The zoning text change is a nice, concise allowance that still preserves the restricted nature of this particular, of the ED2 district. So, it makes that area more of a destination when there were clothing stores there that didn't perform that well.
I think it'll be very well received.
I agree. Well said. I don't have anything to add. So do we have a motion? We have two applications. So we'll need a motion that covers both.
I would move to recommend approval of PCR 22-005 for the zoning text change amendment and PCR number 22-006 for the request of Strange Ways Brewing to have a special use permit to operate a restaurant and microbrewery.
Seconded.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Charlie?
Aye.
Mr. Boswell?
Aye.
Mr. Granger?
Aye.
Mr. Sokolowski?
Aye.
Ms. Liebel?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. That's the recommendation. Next on the agenda is PCR 22-010, a zoning text change. Aaron?
Certainly. Let's see here. The City Council on February 10th, 2022 directed staff to draft an ordinance for consideration by the Planning Commission and City Council to amend the zoning ordinance to allow for extensions to previously approved special use permits. This amendment is due to 3 special use permits which had expired and had to file new applications in order to be renewed. The 3 projects all experienced delays due to staffing concerns and other issues during the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Specifically, the following sections of the zoning ordinance would be updated per the attached ordinance in your packet. Section 21-26 of the Williamsburg Code to allow zoning administrator to grant extensions of not more than 180 days to the expiration of outstanding special use permits under hardship circumstances. For the purpose of the ordinance, those circumstances would be beyond the permittee's control and should include things like wars, floods, unusual delays in transportation, adverse weather conditions not reasonably anticipated, epidemics declared as national public health emergencies by the federal government, a state health emergency declared by the governor of Virginia, or a local health emergency declared by the city of Williamsburg, or other unforeseen acts of God in significant magnitude to vitally affect the permittee's ability to timely carry out the terms of the special use permit. Currently, special use permits are good 1 year from the date of approval by City Council. The Section 21-46 of the Williamsburg Code to reword and clarify the approval period. Staff recommends the Planning Commission recommend approval of the text change to City Council to allow for the 180-day extension of previously approved special use permits under certain hardship circumstances as stated in the proposed ordinance. And the staff is available if you have any questions.
Questions?
I guess I just have one question. Is the acts of God phrasing, is that just a typical thing, or is that, I don't know, there's...
We can't think of everything, and so that covers what we can't think of.
Okay, so that's just a term that's normally used. It's just clarifying that.
Yeah.
That was my understanding.
It's a standard one, yeah. Is that intended to be limiting? I mean, I know act of God is kind of nature and that sort of thing, but this list is very specific in some ways, and so includes but not limited to. Give them just a little extra flexibility, or is that intentional this way?
So the City Council cannot cede its legislative authority to the staff, and so when we have staff-administered provisions in the zoning ordinance, they need to be specific. The staff doesn't get to exercise an unlimited amount of discretion. We also think it's important, from the staff perspective, that applicants move quickly to their site plan. And until COVID, we have never had, to my knowledge or to my predecessor's knowledge, a circumstance where someone was not able to meet that deadline. And so this really was intended to be things that are extraordinarily out of the control of the developer.
So they have 30 days after it expires to make the application? Is that the intent there, or is it as if they're, I wonder about it, you know, if it's getting close to expiring, you know, putting a trigger on that at the beginning, is that?
Not sure that is specifically enumerated.
It's not after, it's 30 days.
Yeah.
Within 30 days.
Within 30 days from the expiration is the way I'm reading it, and I'm just wondering, should we put the onus on the applicant to?
Then 30 days before the expiration.
Because otherwise it's going to expire, and then you're waiting around 30
Then you
more
have another
days
30 days
to
of the
see
180.
what happens. I'm wondering if,
We can make that amendment? Sure.
That would make for an argument that it's expired, how can you extend it? It's
well, there is
expired.
that too,
So
yeah.
the within would imply that it's before it's expired.
Yeah,
So we can make that clarification.
I would suggest that.
Okay.
Clarification to the new person. What exactly has to be completed?
So typically, we will, well, I'm not going to say typically because there's not really a firm case. In most cases, we'll receive a site plan within that year. And once you have a site plan approved, a site plan is good for 5 years. In the case of the 3 special use permits that we had to renew earlier this year, staff did not receive a site plan within that first 1-year period. And so they had to go back and renew the special use permit and then go back through the site plan process. Not in all cases, but in some cases, Strangeways is probably a very good example. You'll have a special use permit that's issued for a year. And if they, for whatever reason, run into issues or something like that, and they don't occupy that space or commence that use within a year, then the permit would expire.
And it has happened. I remember, I'd forgotten there were 3. I remember the 2 of them, but it caused us to have to work extra, so maybe doing this will avoid a little extra work. I know our semi-official proofreader, Ms. Liebel, had sent there were a couple of either a typo or a word left out in the subsection B, just to make sure. I wasn't 100% sure, the right in the middle, actions as are necessary to expiration of the permit.
So we had,
What that
so with respect to what Ms. Liebel had sent us, we had planned for this to come to the Planning Commission in June and to go to the City Council in July, and we got a little ahead of our schedule. And so we've made the appropriate change to the preamble, not to the text of the ordinance, to correct that.
I mean, I'm just not sure what that language, it sounds like there's something left out is on the
I
wording
think we're
there.
talking about different, I didn't correct what you're talking about.
Okay, well, that's what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, Ms. Liebel sent in some things, and I have a couple other things that I don't want to beat up on things that we already covered. So this is separate from what Ms. Liebel said.
Okay.
In the line in subsection B that starts with, that it has actions as are necessary to expiration of the permit. I'm not sure what that.
I think like prevention, or to prevent
Yeah,
expiration of the permit.
there's something, it seems like a word left out there.
To prevent, you think that's,
Whatever, well, there's a word.
It does read a little bit odd.
Yeah, there's a word, I think, it's a Scrivener's error here of some, there's something, maybe a gerund, I don't know, whatever. And then the next to the last line, act of God of sufficient magnitude as to, instead of at to.
Yeah, I missed both of those, James, sorry.
Well, it's, you're
I was
the
more hung
senior
up on the
proofreader, I'm the
timing.
backup, I'll be backup, that's fine, but those were the two things I wasn't 100% sure about, but I'm sure about the magnitude as to vitally affect, but that necessary to expiration, void, I think, maybe.
okay.
To avoid.
We can add that word.
Is the,
Yeah,
but I don't want to tell you what your intent is, but that's what seems to make sense to me. Okay. Any other comments or questions from?
Yeah, I think
Aaron?
it's a good ad. Probably never hopefully never be used. But it's very limited to things that are, as it says in there, out of the reasonable control of permittee, as opposed to couldn't get financing or whatever. I mean, and so I think it's a ad for something that once it happened before, it's probably going to happen again, maybe power to give the
Okay, we need to have an open forum, opportunity for anybody in the massive crowd out there to come and address us on this particular change. And once again, not seeing that stampede, we'll close that forum. Would anybody else have discussion on this before we have a motion? Have a motion?
Recommend to approve PCR number 22-010.
Second.
Heather?
Mr. Hamilton? Mr. Tarley?
Aye.
Mr. Boswell?
Aye.
Mr. Granger?
Aye.
Mr. Sokolowski?
Aye.
Ms. Liebel?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. We don't have site plans or subdivisions to discuss today. There's nothing under unfinished business. I do want to just mention, and I'm not sure where exactly to mention it, that Mr. Hamilton is now on the site plan review committee, and Mr. Sokolowski is no longer on that committee, but he remains on the arts committee. And so if that change could be made on the designation on the website, that would be great. And I'm putting that there because I'll forget it if I don't. New business, our city manager has asked staff to make a presentation on the affordable housing work group recommendation. You remember in our work session last month, he was here and gave us an overview of the entire thing. The number one recommendation was more hotel motel conversions to apartments, and he's asked staff to give us a presentation on that and for us to discuss it and just sort of get a read on what the commissioners think about it. So, here.
So today, as Chairman Boswell stated, we're really looking for feedback on where the Planning Commission sees this recommendation going, and specifically the possibility of amending the current zoning ordinance language to increase the number of housing units that could, or a number of hotel rooms that could be converted to units. So you all have a printed copy of the presentation, so you can make notes. I have notes on mine, so we'll go ahead and get started. So the context here is, this is the top recommendation that came out of the 2021 Affordable Housing Work Group. You all received that presentation last month. In 2015, the city adopted the Planned Development Housing District and supports this type of land use. The flats at 620 York Street and Willow Creek at 216 Parkway Drive are two examples of the hotel conversions using the PDH district. And I'm going to go ahead and interject here. Chairman Boswell had sent me some questions ahead of the meeting, and I'll just kind of touch on a couple of those here. There really wasn't, from my understanding, a measure of success from the work group during using those conversions. I think that the work group saw the possibility of taking two underperforming hotel properties and converting them into fully occupied residential uses as a success. I don't think that there was a particular metrics used to gauge that success, other than those properties are now occupied as full-term or fully occupied as rental units.
And just to clarify, that question was about the phrase based on the demonstrated success of this program. So
Yes.
my question was, okay, what's the measure of that? So thank you for.
And I included, to follow up on that, I included that particular page from the work group's recommendation. And here you can see a photograph of the Willow Creek Apartments. I actually was in that neck of the woods yesterday to post an ARB sign, and if you haven't been to that site, I just drove around it. Hadn't been there in a little while since they got their CO, and it really is a vast improvement to the property from what was there, and seems to be occupied and seems to certainly serve a sector of the population that was seeking housing of that type. So the next item here is the language in the existing ordinance. The existing ordinance defines adaptive housing for the purposes of the PD or PDH section as primarily efficiency in one-bedroom units with adequate cooking facilities created from or part of an existing hotel motel and used for the purpose of providing, and I think this is key, non-permanent, affordable, flexible term housing for individuals and families who may not have access to traditional housing alternatives within the city, and they're not really intended to address visitors. And if you look at the two properties that we have currently, they have a few different leasing models. They do offer a year-long lease, but they also offer 3-month leases and 6-month leases. So it really is intended to be kind of a transitional housing space. I don't know offhand the number of folks that are on those properties right now that have been there since they opened, and I don't know the turnover rate in those properties, but the intent of the ordinance and the definition here clearly indicates that it's meant to fulfill a need to get people housed, to allow them to be in a safe space with adequate cooking facilities, to transition them into more permanent full-time housing. So the existing ordinance limits this use to the B2 zoning. There is no minimum lot size. Limits it to 150 units total in the program. I think we are at like 145 currently, and it limits it to 100 units per site. And then it also limits occupancy within the approved units. So the current ordinance actually limits the number of individuals that can live in the studio and one-bedroom spaces. This is where we get to the fun part, and this is one of the reasons why I printed this out, because it's probably almost impossible to read on these screens, but is easier to read on paper. This is the hotel and motel properties within the city, and so when staff started looking at this, I removed timeshares from this conversation. I don't think that the intention is to convert those units into hotels or into long-term housing. And then to kind of get further into it, staff limited the properties for consideration, at least in staff's mind, for consideration, by removing properties that are owned by the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation, and removing downtown properties, then also removing properties with visible frontage on Richmond Road. And lastly, staff removed the Hampton Inn at 911 Capitol Landing Road, as it's the newest hotel property in the city. And then it left us with this list of some smaller, some larger, mostly older motel properties in the city with a total of 897 rooms. And I will say, I did try to dig in and get occupancy rates for these hotels, but that's not publicly available, so it's hard to determine. We do know that probably some of these hotels are not fully occupied on a regular basis, so it's certainly something that we could consider if we were to add additional properties to this program. We in the past have received the occupancy rates from the applicants indicating their desire to convert an underperforming property. And the next step here is...
Let me ask a quick question. Does the room tax track that at all?
It does, but it's by hotel. It doesn't, I can't tell you how many of those rooms are occupied through that.
Thank
you. I would certainly say if any of the hotels or motels would like to voluntarily disclose that information, staff would receive that welcome. So here's a map of the properties. As you can see, most of them are located on Capitol Landing Road, with a couple of them being out on York Street. There's one, this kind of, see if I can use this magic new tool here, this kind of property that's kind of floating out here, and that is the America's Best property. It technically has a frontage and it's addressed on Richmond Road, but really its primary visible frontage is on Long Hill. It sits behind the McDonald's and next to the CVS. And is I would imagine, underperforming hotel site in the city. So those are the properties, to bounce back to the list on the previous page, those are the properties that staff identified for possible consideration of converting. And the reason why I did that is because I think it's important to have a conversation about what kind of properties we would want to add. If you can see on that list, some of those properties are located in B2, but some of them are also located in B4, and the current zoning ordinance does not allow for properties in B4 to be converted.
And to be clear, this was the staff's
Correct.
analysis.
This is strictly a staff analysis, absolutely, 100%. To kind of go back to the beginning of this conversation, it's really a starting point to see where Planning Commission wants to move. If you would like to consider other properties within the city, that's certainly a possibility.
So are you asking, just since we're just giving you feedback, are you asking us to give feedback on specific properties here, or?
Not necessarily specific properties. We'll get into a little bit kind of closer scope in the next couple of slides. But really, one of the big conversations we need to have is whether or not we want to consider this use in B4. It's not currently a use in B4. And there are a number of properties, essentially almost everything that fronts on Capitol Landing Road is in B4.
Do you have anyone banging at the door hotel conversion at the present time?
We regularly get requests for the America's Best property. I think that there is an appetite out there for some conversion. I don't know what the magic number would be. That's I'm hoping you all might come up with a magic number that we can get to, which is why I included the number of rooms that are in each property. And as an aside, a conversation we had right before the meeting started was, and you remove the larger parcels, we're down to about 537 hotel rooms. And so I give you that number to kind of get you thinking about where we want to go as far as increasing the number of units that are currently allowed in the ordinance. The ordinance currently limits it to 150. So when we're talking about the text change, some of the things we need to consider are city services. And top of that list, as is evident by the recent request from James City County Public Schools for the learning cottages at Matthew Whaley, is the occupancy rates at our schools, and what that means, adding additional housing units in the city and the number of housing units that we're going to propose, and what kind of stressors that may place on the city school system. Human services, the ordinance currently requires there to be some kind of management plan that includes regular communication with human services for residents that may need assistance from human services, calls for fire and EMS. And so this kind of goes both ways, and I'll include police in that list. Currently we may have a higher call volume at some of these hotel motels because they're being used in a manner that's not really a hotel or a motel. And so the uses that are taking place there may add, and I'm not going to say they all do, but may add increased stressors to our public safety agencies. And then the last bit of conversation that we need to consider when we're looking at adding to the existing number of units is transportation services. One of the things the ordinance currently asks us to do is to consider its proximity to transportation services, particularly to WADA, to the public bus system, but also, just regular ability to get on the road and get to your job. If you're commuting, or if you're in town and you're walking or riding a bicycle, just the ability to move from your home to your job and to other services that you may need. And so I think staff would like to see the ordinance specifically request that applicants address these things. We currently ask for a management plan, which is kind of what they're going to talk about doing if they get approved. But I think on the upfront side, we really should ask them what you're proposing going to impact these services, and in what manner. If you can go to the police department or fire and EMS and say, we anticipate the call volume to drop. Certainly that would be a positive impact. If you can say, I'm looking at an existing use and it's nearby a bus stop, that's a great item because you're providing transportation to folks. Typically, I would imagine most places, if you're converting to a studio apartment, you probably aren't going to have a significant impact on schools. Not going to say you won't have any impact, but the likelihood is lower than if you were to have 2 or 3 bedroom units. And I think that the impact to human services is particularly important because the ordinance currently requires there to be some regular communication between human services and these properties.
Have any data from the 2 that have converted as to impact on schools?
I don't have recent data. I know as of a couple years ago, at least one of them did not have any students at it, but I could check that and see what the 2022-2023 school year looks like.
Yeah, I mean, it would seem like we would have some data to address all of those issues as to increase, decrease, or neutral impact upon the services. That would at least give us some guide.
Certainly. I'd be happy to get those numbers for you.
I would tend to think that the nature of this is driven by the number of bedrooms. If it's a 1-bedroom unit, it's less likely to have kids in it. That's just how it.
Yeah, I mean, even all the other ones, the fire, EMS, police, transportation, what kind of impact on any of those services, yeah.
But
And it's going to have to be on a case-by-case, an application-by-application basis, but I think the ordinance and your forms and everything would have to require them to provide some data on that. What they're currently using with regard to fire and EMS and police especially versus the projected. Compare that against what the track record of the 2 that we already know, to the extent that we can get the information.
Yes. We currently, for special use permits for larger projects, we do have the ability to require, a fiscal impact statement. So something along those lines, I think would be helpful in making determinations on applications. But that's not specifically enumerated in the ordinance right now, so it's
Right,
something that we
because
can certainly
any
consider.
application is going to minimize impact. So it would be nice to have actual data.
Correct.
That we could compare.
Any more questions on that particular slide? Okay. So the other considerations when doing this ordinance, and we've kind of started to talk about these a little bit, is the affordability. Currently, the ordinance kind of implies that there should be some level of affordability, but doesn't really enumerate what that looks like, and doesn't call out specific economic indicators. It doesn't call out specific levels of income or any of that kind of thing. To follow up on that, there's also no term of affordability, so if we bring them in and let them come in and we don't put a term of affordability, as soon as that unit turns over, they can raise their rents and move forward. So I think both of those items are probably something that we need to include in the ordinance. What that looks like, I'm not sure. One of the questions that Chairman Boswell asked me was about looking at the very low income and the low income as defined by HUD, and how this particular affordable housing goal kind of addresses those concerns. Right now, the ordinance does not. It presumes that because of the type of use that you're getting, that you're going to pay less rent, but there's no limit currently. And so that's something that we should consider.
Right, and that's currently tied to median or mean area income,
Median
right?
family income. It's a determination issued by HUD annually.
Yeah, that makes more sense. I think that's what we had discussed in the presentation
Yes.
during the work session, so glad that's, worked its way.
Another item that came up was occupancy. So there's not any way for the city to regulate the occupancy, whether it's to students or whether it's to older adults, or there's not a mechanism, a legislative mechanism for us to say, you shouldn't be renting to students, or you should be renting to adults over 25, or there's no way to limit that. We don't have the legislative authority to do that. We do and are able to regulate the number of people that live in a space, and the ordinance currently does that. So with that, I think I'm all finished. I'm going to open it for commission discussion. I know that we've talked about it a little bit, but if you have any feedback for me, that would be super helpful. And if you want me to go back to any of the slides that we had, I'd be happy to scroll back to those.
So I'll jump in if it's all right and say I think it's a great idea to do some more of this. I think it's important, especially from the affordability aspect. That's just vital, I think. I think a lot of the hotels that are listed on here are good candidates because of their location. They are located in such a way that the occupants could generally get to a place of work or a bus stop. They're not so out of the way, I guess. So I feel good about them and the whole concept. I do struggle a little bit with the notion of, well, we think that this one might be good for redevelopment into something else, and how that will work from a property rights concept. I feel like currently there was a race to see who could get which ones approved first, and once you got first and second, then
We ran out of units.
capped out. And so it wasn't so much based on, well, we'd really like to see yours turned into something else. At least if it wasn't overtly indicated that way. It would have been a discussion that would come up through the special use permit and things like that. So I don't know how to really deal with that designation of, no, we think we'd like to see it redeveloped into something else. Because the argument could be made for something like, let's say, the Bassett Motel. Well, it could easily be bought by one of the neighbors, and they could expand their business into it or something. So while it's hard for it to redevelop on its own, it could redevelop through an adjoining parcel. But I think finding ways to do affordable housing in the very near future is vital to our community. And I think we're on a very good path. The occupancy, I thought that was a good topic, and it went a little different than I expected, because I expected we would talk about the number of people who would be allowed in a unit, as opposed to the points that you brought up. So I thought you brought up good points, and I think it's a good concept, and we should continue down this path, because there are people staying in these hotels in less than marvelous conditions.
I agree that, from the report that we received, the Affordable Housing Work Group report, this particular conversion is the quickest way to put units on the market. And the two examples that we have, I think, should give us some data and some things that we might massage, modify moving forward based upon the information that we can get. But it's not just changing your name from, can't remember what it was, Red Roof Inn to Willow Creek. There's a lot of money that has to go into restoring those. And so rather than staying, as Mr. Granger alluded to, in a hotel in its present condition, it's an actual living unit. And so there's a positive, not only in providing additional housing, but also in appearances in the areas. Both of those developments are much more attractive places. Their parking lots are full, and people are living in them. So for the purposes of that Affordable Housing Work Group report, this is the quickest way to get units out there. There are a number of candidates if this was made available, and so I think part of this process of putting together an ordinance, even if we consider B4, will be what are the standards we're going to require, even a B4. Certainly there will be a different set. Every time you have one of these, give and take is you're taking assumed revenue from the city because you're changing it from commercial to residential. Regardless of how it is doing, there still is that loss. noted with the number of acres, 5, that's a consideration to have too. I don't think it should rule anything out. Every property should have the opportunity, opinion, to be able to convert. Many of these hotels pre-70, pre-80, almost all of them. So, lots happened in that 40-year time period, and the market has changed. So I think it's a good step forward to do what we wanted to do, address this issue. It can be done a lot quicker than any of the other things that we have, just so long we take our time and figure out what are the parameters that I think the data we can get from the 2 that we have right now should be very helpful to us.
Hamilton? Which fortunately, we do not have to decide today. Legal? Any?
I don't have anything to add. I agree completely with everything Mr. Tarley and Mr. Granger said.
Okay. Mr. Sokolowski? So there were a couple of other questions that I sent to you that I don't want to see this as a sort of a solution in search of a problem, but Ms. Liebel sort of alluded to the fact that there's a question of demand, right? I mean, I haven't seen any data as to if we build it, will they come? There are people, as Mr. Granger said, there are people living in substandard conditions in the hotels, motels now. I don't know if they'll be able to afford these upgraded properties. So what happens to those people? And so I think as we move forward with sort of firming this up, I think my recommendation would be not to expand into B4 yet, but to look at the B2. You said that one of the hotels and motels in B2 is already kind of chomping at the bit. So if we increase the cap in a reasonable manner, not by the 500 or whatever, but if we increase it, so that maybe to give space for 2 or 3 more, sort of based on the room counts that you were talking about, that seems to be a reasonable approach. I would like to see some of the data that Ms. Liebel kind of mentioned. What are the current people? What are they saying about demand? How do we know that the demand is there, and that we're targeting the income level, the folks in the income levels that we are trying to target, right? Are we really, is this really a solution that will help people who need it in those income levels? The people that are working in the service industries and all of that. So I would feel more comfortable if getting some information that addresses that question. I mean, I think this is a great idea. I don't have anything against it, but I just want to make sure that as we move forward with it, we're sure that we are really meeting the demand and addressing the problem that we're trying to address, or that we say we're addressing. So that would be my sort of general feedback on that. Anything else on that? Okay, we don't have an open forum on that, but if anybody would like to say anything to us, we're here to listen. Nope. Okay. We have our regular information items in our packet and linked online. The last thing that we have is our regular commission reports. Mr. Tarley on the EDA.
So this past meeting, the EDA had a presentation from Doug Smith, who's the president and CEO of Hampton Roads Alliance. He actually had also been on the business roundtable that the EDA had done the day before. And so he discussed the projects and value brought to the city by it's now that we're part of the Hampton Roads Alliance, and discussed resources available to the city moving forward, such as data and metrics of visitors and trying to organize the entire Hampton Roads area into one economic force. And then there was an interesting presentation. The city had received some data through a contract, Buxton, some analytics of visitors that come to Williamsburg, and using basically your cell phone data, have an extern fourth-year student at William & Mary, who's deep diving in it. And he gave a very interesting presentation just on an initial deep dive on the demographics of our visitors, where they go, where they're from, how old are they, estimated economic status, and so the EDA is going to keep digging deeper into that data to hopefully help develop marketing strategies for the city. But it's very interesting dive into data that's tracking you as we speak.
Watching us. All right, thank you. Ms. Liebel, anything interesting on the ARB?
Aaron did a really good job covering everything that's been going on in the ARB and in the planning department's monthly report. The last meeting that we had did have, as she alluded to, the presentation by Strange Ways, and we did have, I'm always all about the colors, and they wanted these sort of turquoise, or suggested they wanted turquoise umbrellas, and we suggested they go with something a little bit more sedate. But other than that, it's ordinary signs. The Hilton Garden Inn up on Richmond Road is going to rebrand, and actually the rebranding process makes the signage more visible at night, which is probably an improvement for them. So nothing much exciting that wasn't covered in Aaron's report.
Mr. Sokolowski.
Yeah, so due to some conflicts, I was unable to attend the Public Arts Committee meeting. However, I do know that their application now for seeking mural artists is live. It's up. Just kind of spreading the word. Getting applicants right now. That's kind of the phase we're in. So
That's good. That's good.
stuff.
Okay, we have public hearing scheduled for May 18th, although I hear rumors that something may get pulled because it's not quite ready for us, but I guess we'll have a meeting anyway. Anything else that we need to discuss?
Nothing to
from
add.
Staff, anything else? Okay, we're adjourned.